All right, good evening, everybody. Welcome to the regular meeting of Kimberley City Council for May the 13th, held here in the place called Kukumanum on the homelands of the Ktunaxa peoples. Do we have any late items this evening?
There is no late items, Mr. Mayor.
Hearing none, can I have a mover to adopt the agenda? Councillor McBain moves, Councillor Dunneback seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. We have a couple of minutes to adopt. First up is the regular meeting of council held on April the 22nd. Mover, please. Councillor McBain moves. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. And the minutes of the Accessibility Advisory Committee meeting held on March the 6th. Mover, please. Councillor McBain moves and Councillor Karen seconds. All those in favor? That motion is carried. So we have Councillors McGuire and Cairns online this evening. The balance of us are here in council chambers. Before we get into the meat of the meeting, I would like to recognize our first media person here in council chamber since the beginning of COVID. Now, was that a few months ago? Wow, a few years ago. Dave, could you just tell us who you are? Make sure the mic is on. Awesome. There we go. Thank you, Sandra.
Yeah, got it. Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship, councillors. My name is Dave Lunenberg. I'm the new reporter for Rewind Radio and Wild in Cranbrook. Been here now just a little over a month. And as I've had already an opportunity to meet the mayor a couple of different times, I've mentioned that, the intention is obviously to try to get out here at least once a month to cover the meetings. And of course, we'll be obviously communicating when other stories come up throughout the month. So thank you very much for the invite.
Awesome, Dave. Thanks for being here tonight. We appreciate it. Okay, bit of a change in the posted agenda. We are going to be receiving our audited financial statements this evening. And we have Mario online, so we'll deal with that first so that he doesn't have to kind of hang in there for the duration. So the item is number 1 under new business. And the motion on the floor is that the 2023 City of Kimberley consolidated financial statements substantially in the form attached to the Deputy Chief Financial Officer and Chief Admin Officer's report be accepted and approved. Councillor McBain moves and Councillor Roberts seconds. All right, Mario, take it away.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me on screen here. So as mentioned, we are here to present the audited financial statements for the City of Kimberley for the year ended December 31st, 2023. You have a full copy of the financial statements in your agenda package, but I've prepared a brief PowerPoint just to walk through some of the highlights for those in attendance, and also if Mayor and Council have any other questions on them. Now, as we discussed before we get into the financial statements, as we discussed back in the winter during the planning stages, there is a new accounting standard that came in that requires all governments across, and I have wrong screen shared again. So this new standard that has come into play requires all governments across Canada to, for the first time, record on their financial statements any legal obligation to decommission their assets. And that takes the form as retirement obligations. So this slide highlights for you the 4 categories that we've broken it down to, being building, any hazardous materials in buildings, mainly asbestos, but it could be lead paint or other such items. Some infrastructure, some pipes in the ground that would need to be removed as they fail. The retirement of your wastewater treatment plant, and then just some other items there. Now, we're showing this future cost of $24 million to remediate. This is what the anticipated cost would be 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 40 years from now, whenever you would retire the asset. As you can see, there was no liability recorded before, But now we have a new liability of 12.5 million that's been recorded for the first time. It's important for council to remember that this is not something that you need to be funding today, and it's not money that you have to put aside in a reserve fund. As part of your asset management planning, now that these items are going to be tracked, it's going to be easier for management to determine if we want to do a renovation in one of your buildings. We know what the remediation costs of removing the asbestos would be, so now we can factor that into our decision making. And that's the spirit that this accounting standard has come in. And so I want to pause on that before we get into the financial statements, just to make sure that we highlighted this is what's happened, this is what's changed. It's not that all of a sudden there's this new liability that we didn't know about. The number's always been there. Now we're just putting it and tracking it on the statements.
Excellent. Council, any questions or comments on this? Go ahead, Councillor McGuire.
I'm just curious, future cost is around 24 million, where we're looking at new liability of 12 million. Why the discrepancy between the two numbers?
Through the mayor to Councillor McGuire. So the reason is that over time, as we get closer to the retirement date, there's going to be what's called an accretion expense that will build the liability up. So right now we're showing what it is today, but time value of money, it will grow over time as we get there.
Further, Councillor McGuire? Nope. Okay, no further questions. Go ahead, Mario.
Okay. So now let's get into the financial statements themselves. So I have up our independent auditors report, and if it is Mayor and Councillors' intention to approve the financial statements, we are issuing a clean audit opinion. So in our opinion, these statements do present fairly the results of the City of Kimberley for the year ended December 31st, 2023. And so moving into the numbers themselves, we'll start on the statement of financial position. So this is a snapshot of all of your assets and liabilities at the end of the year. And we've been seeing some trends this year in looking at the financial statements across the province for local governments. And we're seeing growth in your financial assets. So this is all the cash you have and cash that will be coming in. $36 million last year, up to $41.8 million. When we look at your liabilities, excluding your municipal finance authority debt, because obviously that's paid out over a longer period, that did increase from 24 million up to 26.3 million. That increase is mainly grants that were received in advance of the capital projects moving forward. But then we come down to our net financial asset position of $15 million. And what that number represents is that if we paid off all our obligations tomorrow, what we would have left to be able to continue to deliver services to the community. And that is up 3.5 million from last year. And we'll start to get into where those changes came in and why we have that improved position. So this next slide looks at our revenues in a comparison of budgets to actuals. Total revenues came in at $32 million, which is favorable to budget, which was $31.3 million and up from $26 million last year. And again, there's two main areas where we saw some very favorable variances against budgets. And the first is provincial grants, which is 6.3 million versus a budget of 5.6, which on the surface seems like that, we did right where we want it to be against our budget and a little bit better. But remembering that included in that number is the $3.5 million from the Growing Communities Fund, which was not budgeted. And so there were also some capital grants that didn't come to fruition this year, which is why even with that 3.5 million, we were just over budget. But again, that was money that was unanticipated and part of the reason why we see an increase in your financial position. The other one where we have a nice variance against our budget is interest income came in at just over $2 million versus $891,000 last year and a budget of $150,000. And, credit to management when they saw money like the Growing Communities Fund coming in, taking advantage of the high interest rate environment and investments and putting that money to work, because that $1.2 million increase versus last year is obviously substantial when we think about a $30 million budget. So that is good to see that came in that way. This next slide just breaks down in a pie chart how we $32 million what it's made up for. And so, we could see that your net property tax for municipal purposes is making up just over a third of that, which is why there's so much diligence spent in determining what the tax rates are on an annual basis. Next slide looks at your total expenses, $22 million versus a budget of $23 million, up from $20 million last year. And, the only item that I'll really highlight on here is protective services. We do see that you were short of budget this year by about $900,000. And the bulk of that was some of the fire fuel mitigation work that didn't proceed this year. And hopefully that work will be able to be completed in 2024. And this next slide just highlights $22 million, showing where it is broken down by the various categories. And again, your people being the wages and benefits make up a third of that number. So when we come to the end of the day, we ended up with an annual surplus of $9.8 million. And what's important to remember is that this is a surplus for accounting purposes. When we prepare the financial statements, items like capital projects, which are an expense in your budget, show up as assets in the financial statements. So there is a bit of a disconnect between how you budget according to the community charter versus what we have in the financial statements. But this slide will help us see how we did against our actual budget. We have an annual surplus of $9.8 million. We deduct our capital projects at $11.2 million, add back our amortization, which isn't funded, and we come to a net change of in our financial position of $3.4 million. And when we look back at what we talked about, where our revenue position was favorable to budget, when we talked about Growing Communities Fund and the interest income, that is really what drove having that surplus this year. So if it were not for that, you would have actually been break even, which is in line with what you had budgeted for your operating side as well. So, happy to report that you did do well against your budget this year. The next slide, now we're going to move over to our accumulated surplus, because if you read the front page of the financial statements, it shows an accumulated surplus of $117.5 million, which we know is not what you have in the bank right now. And so I always like to highlight that included in that number is what we call equity and physical assets at $84.7 million. And what that number represents is if we take all the money that we spent over the years on infrastructure, deduct depreciation, deduct any debt outstanding, and deduct those asset retirement obligations, that is what's there. So it's really like looking at what the equity in your home is, and in this case, the equity in your community. But that's not something that as a municipality you can borrow against. So it's kind of more of an accounting exercise, not what you should be looking at in terms of making decisions on your surplus. What you do have for a cash surplus is $2.9 million in operating and capital fund balances, which that is the unencumbered money that management can execute the approved budget on to deliver services to the community. And then we have in the restricted surplus just shy of $30 million, which I hope that everybody can read this, but if not, it is in the notes to your financial statements. And this is the reserves that you have set aside in there. You can see that there is a lot of capital money being set aside, which we know there is a lot of asset management planning happening, so it's good to see that's there. We also see that $3.5 million for the Growing Community Funds, which was a new reserve this year that will be spent in the coming years. But again, $29 million or $29.9 million set aside for future projects. So I'll pause there and just ask if council has any questions before we talk about the audit results quickly.
All right, thank you, Mario. Council, comments or questions at this point? Seeing none, back to you, Mario. Oh,
Okay, thank you.
A late hand went up. Councilor McGuire, go ahead.
I'm just curious about the carbon tax project reserve line there. Maybe that's a question for Jim.
Yeah, I can
Curious
speak
what
to
that is.
It's actually changed in recent years. That used to be the CAREP grant that we received every year. If we didn't spend that, we would put it into reserves and spend it on projects that resulted in reduced GHG, purchase of electric vehicles, LED lights, that type of thing. More recently, that the CARE program has changed to the LG CAP, Local Government Climate Action Protection Plan. Under that, I believe we get about $94,000 a year over a period of 3 years, 3 or 4 years. So it's similar type of thing. So that's going into the reserve to fund projects that will result in reduced GHG emissions. There's some criteria attached to that money that comes in. So it sits in a reserve until we spend it.
Thanks, Kim.
Yeah.
Further, council? Go ahead, Mario.
Okay, so in terms of the audit results, I do want to express that the audit was completed on time and that we did not have to deviate from our planned approach. Management was very proactive in terms of getting us the high quality information so that we were able to conclude that these financial statements were free from misstatements. And that also, while we touched on asset retirement obligations at the start, at a very high level, I also want to commend management because there was a lot of heavy lifting done, not only by finance, who was kind of steering the ship and making sure that the information was being pulled together, but operations also had to contribute to that. So a thank you to management there. And we did not have any issues with the adoption of that standard either. And then also, you know, in light of, you know, the increased transparency in terms of transparency and making sure that you know, transactions are appropriately approved. We do perform specific transaction testing with management, and there were no issues in any transactions identified that were with management for items like expense reports and payroll and the like. I will stop there. If there's any other questions on the audit itself, I'm happy to answer them. Otherwise, we will let you continue on.
Council, last call. I would like to thank our Chief Financial Officer / CAO through the course of this audit for doing double duty. And much of the heavy lifting came from our Deputy CFO. Krista, thanks so much for all of the work, and of course the rest of your staff. 32 million in revenue, or 32 million in budget accounts. There's a lot of transactions that are involved in that. And to come up with a clean audit, as we have, says an awful lot to the level of detail that that staff have put into this. So on behalf of council, thank you very much for an awesome job. And thanks for this presentation, Mario. Very concise, clear, even for council members to be able to understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. We will kind of go back to the agenda as we started. And the first item under bylaws is the proposed road closure bylaw for the property adjacent to 255 Knighton Road. And the motion on the floor is the council approve first, second, and third reading. Is that? Oh. Yep, sorry. Small procedural detail. We received the report. We now need to vote on that. Did we have a mover and a seconder? We did. So I will call the question then on the receipt of our financial statements and the approval of the financial statements. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Sorry, folks, got a little bit ahead of myself there. So back to the proposed road closure. And the motion on the floor is the council receive first, second, and third reading of highway closure and dedication removal bylaw 2760. Could I have a mover? Thank you, Councillor McBain. Councillor McGuire seconds. Troy, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. This road closure bylaw pertains to a section of unimproved road right-of-way adjacent to the property at 255 Knighton Road, which is the property owned and occupied by the Kimberley Helping Hands Food Bank Society. This, of course, pertains to earlier discussion and decision by council around the proposed land transfer from their February 12th meeting. Final approval and completion of that land transfer, of course, is conditional upon council's subsequent approval of this proposed road closure bylaw, which also requires approval from the Ministry of Transportation. If the road closure bylaw is eventually adopted by council, then that land transfer will be able to be completed. The Food Bank Society intends to use that piece of property to expand their land there and use that for expanded secure fenced area and kind of do more of the same what they're doing on their other lands and behind the building there, which is basically just general storage, some greenhouses and garden plots, and also vehicle parking and storage. There's no other parcels immediately adjacent to this proposed closed road area, and it's been deemed surplus, not required for any other city infrastructure or land needs there. There is a short section of storm main that cuts through that property, as well as the food bank's existing property. So one of the requirements there will be that we register a statutory right-of-way for that little short section of storm main, but it'll basically just be the extension of that existing statutory right-of-way. As I mentioned, we also require Ministry of Highways approval of the bylaw before adoption, and they have in fact already confirmed that they have no issues or concerns with that. So if council approves three readings tonight, then we'll be prepared to issue notice of the road closure and notice of disposition as well.
All right, excellent. Thank you,
Yeah.
Troy. Council, questions or comments? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? I think that was an in favor, right, Woody? Yeah, that was an in favor. Thank you. Chair is back on the ball. That motion is carried. Thank you. All right, next up, we have the small scale multi-unit housing zoning amendments. And we have two motions on the floor for this. First is that council approve first, second, and third reading of bylaw 2764. Yeah, there's two separate here. So 2764, Amendment 173 to zoning bylaw 1850, 1994. 1850 has been around a while. When we do amendments, do we get to change that date, Troy?
The original date of the original bylaw stays until
Stays.
we replace the full bylaw.
Okay, fair enough. Thank you. Mover, please. Councilor McBain moves. Councilor Roberts seconds. So this is a huge amount of work. In fact, it was a lot of work just reading through this. Quite honestly, Troy, congrats. I know a lot of this was imposed on some really tight timelines by the province to get this done by the end of June. And congrats to you and staff for making the headway that you have on this. Look forward to you giving us the skinny on this now. Go ahead.
Thank you for that.
Well, I'll tell you what, let me get it on the floor. Mover, please. Oh, we did. Okay, the chair isn't quite back on the ball. Go ahead, Troy.
Okay, well, thank you again. It has been a fair amount of work, but also, thank yous and kudos to council for the previous work done to amend our zoning a couple of years ago in 2022 to amend the R2 and some other zones that were kind of an earlier step, I guess, towards these changes being brought in by the province. So yeah, in November 2023, the province passed several new pieces of legislation that is leading local governments across the province to amend their zoning to allow for more diverse housing options within traditional single family and duplex lots. So we, like I said before, we actually made a series of amendments in this area a couple of years ago, and this round is really kind of bringing that all together and kind of making for very similar zoning throughout most of the community. So just as another brief recap, those legislative changes require that any zones that previously allowed 1 or 2 units be amended to allow at least 3 or 4 units. And then there's other zones that might have previously allowed only 1 or 2 units, but might have servicing restrictions or terrain challenges, that kind of thing. So those ones are considered exempted under the legislation. So we've crafted a series of amendments to amend the 1850 bylaw, which of course is our oldest zoning bylaw that applies to most of the community. The other resolution for council's consideration applies to the Alpine zoning bylaw, and we'll deal with that shortly. But in this case, these proposed amendments here to 1850 bylaw propose a series of amendments. So there's some general amendments that are, I would say, more like housekeeping amendments, some definition changes for consistency between the 2 bylaws, and also general regulations around landscaping, just to clarify some changes that were done in 2022, and also the vehicle and bicycle parking regulations for consistency and compliance with the provincial legislative requirements. More specifically with the zones, I mentioned that there's some zones that are considered exempt under the legislation from the requirement to allow more housing options. So there's a new zone proposed that we've titled the residential limited zone, or the RL zone. And that's those text changes are covered in Schedule A of the bylaw, and the map changes in Schedule F of the bylaw. And that basically allows or continues a number of that's not the best way to put it, sorry. There's a number of parcels zoned to allow for only quite low density. In fact, they're generally quite large parcels. Most of them have servicing challenges where they can't be connected to municipal sewer, but they are connected to municipal water, and that's not likely to change in the future. So those zones and a few other large parcels that are not fully serviced or have other constraints that requires them to be in the zone. So those are laid out in those schedules as I mentioned. And then the housing options for those or for that zone is really just limited to single unit dwellings or with the option of accessory dwellings. And that's basically a new option, I guess, in some cases there for those lots. The more common zone, the proposed new zone, the residential standard zone or the RS zone, those text changes are covered in Schedule B of this bylaw, and the map changes showing in Schedules G and H. So this is kind of 2-part. I mentioned before the R2 zone changes that were done in 2022. This will effectively just change the name of all of those parcels previously zoned R2 to this new RS zone. And then the bulk of the restricted parcels under the legislation, so those zones that previously only allowed for 1 or 2 units on a property, now fall, most of them fall within this RS zone. And that basically makes them match or very consistent with the previous R2 zone, which allows not only the minimum 3 or 4 units required by the province, but up to 6 principal units that was already allowed in the modified R2 zone. And then there's some other development rule changes, like we modified the reduced rear yard setback from 3.5 meters to 2 meters, remove the height step back requirement, and allow for potential stratification of accessory dwelling units. And those are all to comply with the provincial policy manual and site standards that are recommended under the legislation. So this will apply to a host of zones. So many parcels that are zoned R1, R6, R8, R8A, R9, R11, R14, and CD4 will all now fall under the RS zone, along with all of the parcels previously zoned R2, which is, I forget the number off the top of my head, but it's over 3,000 parcels, I think. So, so that's going to be the most common zone by far throughout the community. And then all of the other new zones are basically based on that residential standard zone, but allow for the specific uses that were previously allowed under their zone. So the next one I'll speak to is the residential standard mobile home zone, or the RSMH zone for short. These text changes are covered in Schedule C, and map changes in Schedule I of the bylaw. This effectively just rezones the parcels that were previously zoned R4, which is a scattering of parcels down in Marysville that previously allowed a single unit dwelling or a mobile home on the property. So we're applying, like I said, the residential standard zone to allow the wider range of housing options, but also maintaining the provision for mobile home. And that's in part to reflect that there's a number of those parcels that already have or continue to have a mobile home as the principal dwelling unit. And it also adds in the option for those mobile homes to have an accessory dwelling unit, but not a secondary suite, which wouldn't be allowed under the building code. Similarly, there's a new proposed residential standard tourist accommodation zone. So again, this applies to two zones that are on properties down by the river, the R7 and R7A zone. Those zones previously allowed for single unit dwellings, but also had the provision to allow for use of those units as tourist accommodation, subject, of course, now to our short-term rental bylaw requirements. So this zone applies the wider range of options of the residential standard zone, but also maintains that allowance for tourist accommodation use in the principal dwelling unit of a single unit dwelling. So if a multi-unit dwelling is ever developed down there, that those would not be permitted to be used for tourist accommodation. So that's the overview of the proposed changes to the 1850 bylaw. And then I can speak to the Alpine bylaw here after the next, after a decision on this first part.
Right. Thank you, Troy. Go ahead, Councilor McGuire.
Yeah, this is a lot to digest. There's a lot of changes happening here. I'm just curious, is this all driven from the changes at the province, or is there some of this that's just clean up as well? Things that you've taken an opportunity to do that aren't necessarily mandated by the province?
Yeah, good question. Thanks for clarifying. It's predominantly all driven by the legislative requirements. And there is, as I mentioned, there is some what I would call general housekeeping, but all of that is I would say is aligned with and in support of compliance with the legislative requirements and compliance with the provincial policy manual and site standards. And what I'm referring to there is the kind of the guidance document that they provided with the legislation to help local governments kind of find their way through the wide range of zoning amendments that need to be considered, and again trying to improve flexibility for more housing options throughout all zones. So all of those other housekeeping amendments are all, in some cases, things we identified since 2022 and the changes we made previously that we felt needed further clarification. But again, in alignment with the legislative requirements, and but otherwise, yeah, by far the most of it is all just for basic compliance with the legislation.
Thank you, Troy. Councillor Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Troy, if I bought a piece of property underneath the old scheme and the scheme where I have my property changed, if I had a particular view in mind about what I wanted to do, can I do that, or do I have to now work underneath the new scheme?
Unless there's a more specific example, I would say that these changes would most likely only give you more options than what you started with. And like, for example, if you bought a parcel that was zoned to allow for single unit dwelling only, well, you can still develop a single unit dwelling if you so choose, but it also gives you the options to do more than that.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kevin.
Yeah, I guess I just have a question as to the definition of accessory dwelling unit. Means self-contained dwelling unit located on the same parcel as the principal dwelling unit. That seems very broad.
It's actually intended to be quite broad and allow a range of options as an accessory dwelling unit. So some in previous or in the current zone, we have a term for carriage house dwelling, which is a type of accessory dwelling unit that's an accessory dwelling above a detached garage, right? But also included in that accessory dwelling unit is just what some would call a laneway house or a backyard cabin backyard dwelling unit, granny suite, granny flat, sometimes they're called. So we tried to get away from some of those sort of common reference names and just group them all under an accessory dwelling unit, which is any form of detached secondary dwelling on the property.
But would have to comply with all building code and all that stuff and safety.
Of course, yeah, this just is one of the first key stages that as long as we allow for it in the zoning, then they're eligible to get a building permit, which would show that it meets all of our all the building code requirements and all of the other municipal bylaw requirements. Yeah.
Thank you, Troy.
Further? Thought your hand was going up there, Sandra. Okay, go ahead, Councillor McGuire.
Yeah, I'm just curious on the to have this come as a third reading to council before the deadline, as opposed to doing all three tonight.
Yeah, you kind of broke up there at the beginning, Woody.
I think I got the gist of the question, though. I think if I may, I think you're just wondering how much time we have for sure to go through these readings. Yeah. So yeah, we're recommending all three readings. But there is the option we pointed out as a response option is council may choose just to allow or approve first or second or just first only and allow more time to kind of dive in and review and consider this. We are in a bit of a time crunch, but we do have to have the bylaws adopted by the end of June. So there's another regular meeting in May and then 2 regular meetings scheduled in June. So if that's an option that's of interest to council to just approve only first and or second reading tonight, that's certainly an option for you. And then we could follow up at a future meeting for additional readings.
Thanks for that question, Woody. I guess I have kind of in kind of the same vein. When I take a look at the magnitude of the changes that are happening, what pops into my mind is, I wonder about unintended consequences. It's relatively complicated, and when you're on a short leash, like the province has put us on, does that give us time to, as part of the feedback, consider some unintended consequences or kind of how we tiptoe through the minefield on some of this? If you know what I mean. I'm not trying to be.
I think so. I mean, unless like if there's some specific examples again, I guess maybe that you're thinking of, but like I said earlier, there is lots here, but at the same time, if I could sort of try again to simplify the explanation of what's proposed here and what we're requiring is we're really, decisions that council previously made with the housing availability and affordability amendments and that applied to the largest zone in Kimberley, the R2 zone. We're effectively applying those same rules to all of the restricted zones with a few notable exceptions to comply with their legislation there. So effectively there's lots to these amendments. There's lots of pages to review, but basically, and I just went over, the 3 zones, the 3 RS zones, they're all the same base zoning and then just have, a couple of them have some minor differences, I guess, from the RS or the R2 zone. So there it seems like a lot, but in the big picture, I think it's quite a simple overall amendment. So we'll end up having most properties having all of the same base zoning unless they're already zones for commercial or higher density multi-unit residential use. So but yeah, again, there's lots to get through. So if council feels like they want a little bit more time to kind of review that, we do have some time to allow for that.
Great, thanks, Troy. I guess over the course, I don't have any specific examples on what's unintended, right? we don't know what that list might be. But anybody working within the new bylaw and the new zones, there is always option for variance to be submitted to council for consideration, is there? Like that's kind of the way things have worked up to now.
Yeah, I mean, that doesn't change if there's new rules or existing rules that, you know, don't, an applicant can make the case why it doesn't work or fit well with their project plan. Then there's that option to consider a variance for that or relaxation under those rules. I would suggest that again, the spirit of the changes here and the overall objective set by the province to expand the options and the flexibility for more housing should help to minimize the number of variances. So we've those include relaxed setbacks, more height in most cases. All of the restrictions, if you will, or the regulations have generally been loosened or made more flexible to allow for more housing options and allow more creativity in creating more housing.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you. And I guess the other comment more than anything else, because it's in place doesn't mean that you're going to have a stampede of folks running to take advantage of all of this. It is very specific, and I expect that it will ease its way in over time, and we'll learn something from those first few projects that are in place.
That's a really good point. I mean, we've already learned that to some effect with the earlier changes in 2022. There hasn't been a mad rush of new applications to take advantage of those. And when you think about it, most of these parcels are already built on or developed. Certainly, there's a lot of parcels that have more potential now, or of a size where they can add, whether it's accessory units or newer or like replacement principal buildings. But a lot of the buildings, they're newer homes on them, and they're unlikely to see any major redevelopment. There's still a few underutilized or even vacant lots here and there that will have a whole host of options. But again, they also had the same options that they had to start with. So
Yeah, cool.
Yep.
Councillor McBain, and then Councillor Dunlap.
Yeah, I suspect, you guys kind of just touched on it, I suspect the feedback that we're going to get that you alluded to a little bit, Troy, in the 2022 is folks who bought a house or bought a property because it was a certain way when I got it. And I don't want to deviate. I don't want my neighborhood to deviate from that. I foresee that, there could be some pushback or feedback that way, but and you kind of just alluded to it, Mr. Mayor, nobody's obligated to do this, and there hasn't been a mad influx of things. So I think it's just a matter of folks to let the changes digest a little bit and let some new projects come and see how things play out. But I suspect that that'll be the feedback that most of us get, and quite frankly, the province is applying this across the board anyway, so it's not a whole heck of a lot.
For sure. They've kind of sent the message that they're not flexible at all on this. We want to see it implemented as it's been laid out. So we're on the track. Councillor Dunlap and then Councillor McGuire.
I guess my one concern with the densification and the relaxing of setbacks and stuff is the older part of towns that have infrastructure that were built sort of and are at capacity, if they're capable of handling the new said capacity, and also the houses that people have been living in there for a substantial amount of time and don't have the opportunity to seize this. And like, have we thought about the effect of their impact on their life if essentially, towers get built on either side, they lose their daylight, they lose the just all the features that they've lived with their whole life, and how it's going to affect their mental, physical health. Just a thought.
Comment, Troy?
Yeah, there's lots there. I'll try to touch on that. That's okay. Yeah, so I think for the most part, in general, this is small scale, multi-unit housing options, right? So it's not to mean that there's going, every new project's going to be a major change. It might be, just something maybe slightly bigger or whatever than maybe what's been the norm in the past. But and that, we recognize that can have some impact in how others view their property or their enjoyment of their property. But at the same time, we are desperate for more housing, and we need to find ways to allow for and see more housing built throughout our community. And it's way more cost effective and efficient to utilize existing parcels and make better use of infrastructure that we already have, many of which in those older areas needs to be it already is, but will continue to be needed to be maintained and upgraded. And when we know that, if it's block by block or whatever, then we can plan for that accordingly. Now know that we have that potential for more housing over time. But in general, I think there's general capacity to allow for that scale and pace of change that we anticipate under these rules. But yeah, change is always hard, and we saw those kinds of concerns and in previous decisions and previous anytime a new project is proposed, we hear those kinds of concerns, and they're valid and fair concerns, but at the same time we do need to find ways to allow more housing in our community and in existing areas, and that sometimes means they're next door to neighbors that might not be super happy with it, but that's part of why zoning is intended to change and adapt over time to changing community needs.
Councillor McGuire, then Councillor Cairns.
Yeah, I'd like to move to amend the motion to be just the first reading.
So, so with respect to the multiple readings, given the sense of what we're trying to achieve here, Troy, what would be your suggestion for kind of movement? I worry about doing these one at a time, Councillor McGuire, just based on the number of meetings that we have left. I mean, we could do first and second, first reading. What's your counsel on that?
I think, whether we do first only or first and second doesn't change too much. So like I said, we have 3 more regular scheduled meetings before the end of June. So if we only do first and second tonight, then at one of the 2 next meetings we need to have third reading. And this would allow, if there's some tweak or edit that's identified, we would need to see that or hear that as soon as possible so that we can make those changes before third reading and then have adoption before the end of June. So I would say we would need 3 meetings, sorry, for if we're going to break up the first, second, third reading, we'd need probably three meetings to get the bylaws across the finish line.
Right. Okay. Councillor Cairns.
Thank you. I think, it was just a few weeks ago or maybe a month ago that we talked about this as a general direction to apply the option, for more consistency throughout the community with this zoning change, and that it was coming down the pipe, and that we wanted to get that in place, to have that consistency, and that it's really clear that it's not that it opens the option to pursue this, and it's the direction that we're going to go. And there's a lot of complexity to how that update needs to happen. And I think from an efficiency standpoint, it's really important to move on it. And I would support moving the recommended option to approve the 3 readings tonight. That out there.
Further, Councillor McGuire?
Yeah, I'd like to move to amend to first reading. We have the time to do this through 3 meetings, and I don't see any advantage of rushing through it.
So is this an amendment?
Yes.
Okay, counsel from our corporate officer says we have to defeat this in order to move to the next motion, which you are suggesting. Why can't we amend that?
Actually,
Changing the essence of the motion?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, so do we have any further comments on this right now? So what I'll do is call the question on this. We'll take the vote. And if that vote is defeated, then we will go back and Councillor Maguire will put an alternate vote on the table. Okay, so I will call the question then. All those in favor of first, second, and third readings? All those against? So given that there are 6 of us, that means that motion is defeated. So when there is a tie, the motion is deemed to be defeated. So Councillor Maguire can now put an alternate resolution on the table.
Yeah, I'd
And so-
propose first reading.
Yeah, and just so we're clear, if this is also 3-3 and defeated, we're in trouble.
It's also noted.
Yeah, thanks, Sandra. Okay, Councillor Maguire.
Yeah, I'd move that we do first reading.
So the council approve first reading of bylaw number 2764, amendment number 173.
Correct.
Do we have a seconder? Councillor Dunneback seconds. Call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? All right, that motion is carried. Thanks, folks. We will get to the same end goal within the time period. This will give us a little bit of breathing room to take a look at, think a little bit about perhaps some of the unintended consequences or other things with this pretty complex change. Thanks very much, Troy. The second piece of this, yeah, we ready for that? Yeah, so this is also first, second, and third reading. Can I suggest that rather than that, we go with first reading? Okay,
Also
so
move.
the motion on the floor is that council approve first reading of bylaw number 2765, amendment number 39 to 1850. Moved by Councillor Maguire, seconded by Councillor Dunneback. Further discussion? All those in favor? The motion is carried. All right, excellent. Thanks very much, Troy. More to come. Okay, down to the financial bylaws for adoption. This is the end of a very long journey, Council. When did we have our first meeting, Jim?
As staff, I think maybe last August. Council, it was in the fall, I believe it was September.
Yeah, this process is not an easy process. The amount of staff time accumulated through this thing is substantial. So congratulations to everybody for getting to the end. So the first bylaw up for adoption is the 2024-2028 5-year financial plan bylaw. It's for consideration of adoption. We've already been through several readings on this. So Councillor McBain moves, Councillor Roberts seconds. Any further discussion? Call the question then. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Next up, we have the City of Kimberley Parcel Tax Imposition Bylaw. And the motion on the floor is that the bylaw be adopted. Mover, please. Councillor McBain moves and Councillor Roberts seconds. So just to be clear, this is for the Aquatic Center parcel tax. It's got kind of a fairly complicated name to something that's very specific. So further discussion? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. Next up, we have the City of Kimberley 2024 tax rates bylaw for consideration of adoption. the motion is that the City of Kimberley 2024 tax rates bylaw number 2763 be adopted. Mover, please. Councillor McGuire moves. Councillor Roberts seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. All right, that's it for the financial bylaws. Congratulations, staff. Congratulations, council. We now start the process for next year, it would appear. Okay, next up, under new business, we've already dealt with the consideration of acceptance and approval of the financial statements. So next up, we have a transit update on service expansion. Oh, we have another zoning amendment. Thank you. Apologies. Zoning amendment, bylaw number 2680 for 217 Stemwinder Drive. And the motion on the floor is that council adopt the amendment. Mover, please. Councillor McGuire moves. Councillor Roberts seconds. This is for adoption. Troy, do you want to just give a quick summary for public edification?
Yeah, this one has been in the works for a while, finally coming back for final stage of approval. This is a property on Stemwinder Drive that received first, second, third reading some time ago, and then was left with the applicant to finish up some of the requirements to allow for final adoption. Some of which was a portion of the Peak to Platzel Trail that actually was kind of cutting across the corner of that parcel, and the applicant has made the revisions to modify that trail to so it's not encroaching as much on that parcel, and updated the statutory right-of-way to correctly align with that realigned trail. And then there was also some other abandoned utility lines that had a SRW that were no longer required. So those have been released as well. And applicant was also required to pay for the new water and sewer service connections to allow for new dwelling or new housing on that property. And those have now been submitted and received. So we're ready to recommend adoption on that bylaw. And everything is good to go that way. So this just to kind of tie back into the larger small scale multi-unit housing. So this, if council adopts this bylaw, it'll for a short period of time be changed to the RTA 1 zone, but then that zone, the name of it will change to the, well, assuming that the small scale multi-unit housing zoning changes are eventually adopted by council, it'll be included in those changes as well, and fall into that new zone category there.
Excellent. Thank you, Troy. Further comments, council? All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. All right, next up, we have the transit update, as I started to mention a couple of minutes ago, on the service expansion and ridership. And the motion on the floor is the council received the report from the manager of planning. Mover, please. Councillor Roberts moves. Councillor Karen seconds. Go ahead, Troy.
I was supposed to have a break in between my reports here, but yes.
Sorry.
So this report is kind of two parts. One is to update council on the expansion request that they approved last fall, and that of course we were waiting for the provincial budget approval side of things to allow for that. We have received word from the province or from BC Transit that based on the funding available, that only one of our two expansion requests have been approved for implementation this next year. So that is the winter shuttle, additional hours and one additional bus to allow for expansion of the winter shuttle route and some expansion of the Route 24 local on-demand transit services. So, so things are in progress already to see that implemented. Still some work to do with BC Transit on that regard, but that should all be ready to be in place and take effect for the next winter season of the winter shuttle. and then be consistent moving forward from there. So a bit of disappointment. The other expansion option, of course, the council had approved in the memorandum of understanding was the additional 2 buses and additional hours to allow for an additional morning and evening trip on the KC commuter service. So that will sort of keep our request in place, I guess, so that hopefully it can be considered again next year. Probably sometime this fall, there'll be another report to council on just kind of confirming that in an updated memorandum of understanding. But hopefully we can get that in place because as we'll see here in the next part of this report, use is increasing in that service, so as well as the shuttle service. So that's it for the expansion update. In terms of overall transit ridership, did a bit of a breakdown here that I think is mostly all good news. Our ridership continues overall on all of our services and transit. Ridership continues to increase each year with a fairly healthy increase from the previous year of 11.6%. So we're overall total ridership is over 21,000 riders in the year, which is good to see. The Health Connection service is I guess maybe the somewhat not so great news. We're continuing a sort of a downward trend in ridership there. There was a little bit of an increase last year over the previous year, but overall the last 5 years that use of that service has trended downward. It's not perfectly able to kind of define why that is, but I think a lot of it has to do with past users using the Health Connection service, which is the 3 daytime trips back and forth to Cranbrook, and many of those are starting to use the KC commuter service instead, I think. So which that service is again continues to grow very well. A very slight increase last year from the previous year, but overall, the ridership is more than recovered from the pandemic impacts there. And our winter shuttle service as well was kind of hit with a double whammy of both the pandemic seasons and the season without the main quad share, and which had obviously the service was discontinued there for a while altogether. But yeah, we're really seeing that recover well last year, and so this is the 2022-2023 season that we're referencing here. Of course, the shuttle season goes from December to April. So the April year of 2020 or April of 2024, or the January to April 2024, that'll be reported next year, I guess, as that season. But we don't have the April stats yet, but we're already over that ridership, I guess. So that's even more a little tease there. The good news coming there. So, and the other service, of course, is our local on-demand service, and this is really great to see. Very steady, stable ridership, but still growing each year. And that's, of course, very helpful for a number of, for all the users to get around town by pre-booking their trip and, getting to and from their door to wherever they need to get to in town for errands or what have you. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that in case there's any questions.
Yeah, so with respect to that, the pre-booking is day before, like it's 24-hour notice?
Generally, yeah, they sometimes can, accommodate on a call in the morning and get something in the afternoon, but yeah, generally it's at least a day before.
Right, okay. Council? The Kimberley Cranbrook commuter, that's really disappointing. As you can see, and I mean, we were hitting a bit of a stride just before COVID hit, and that's more than a recovery from that. It's an extra, 1,500 riders over and above what it was pre-COVID. I would suggest, and this is anecdotal, this is not scientific in any way, but given that we had 71.57 last year, 72.31, a very modest increase of 1%. I would suggest that until we get either bigger buses or more buses of that size with more frequent, we're going to be sticking at about the 7,000 rate. I don't think we're going to see much of an increase in that. which is really disappointing when you consider that we've got anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 cars a day trips a day that go back and forth between here and Cranbrook. I think there's an appetite for that capacity, and it's just really, really disappointing that BC Transit turned that down. Yeah, Councillor McGuire, go ahead.
Yeah, I have a similar sentiment. And I'm curious what flexibility we have to even, do we have an ability to work with the RDEK or work with the city of Cranbrook? Or is this all driven through BC Transit? We essentially just have to do what we're told.
Go ahead, Troy.
I mean, we have to continue working with BC Transit, of course. We can certainly try to work more closely with Regional District and City of Cranbrook on that, but we're still working within the BC Transit system, which again, I don't want to. I don't think we could offer any of the service that we offer now if we didn't have BC Transit as a partner. So I want to be careful with kind of how much we criticize them for that. I think it's a sign of the growing demand for transit service throughout the province. So like all of our decisions, we have to understand that they have some limitations on what they can provide for all the requested expansion. So we're happy that we got at least one of the two, but we'll keep the second request for commuter service on the list. Hopefully next year that we get a better outcome on that. But yeah, I mean, I have some sympathy there. There's a lot of requests across the province, so I guess maybe our two requests maybe seem pretty minor in the grand scheme of things, but at the same time, I'm sure there's others that are not getting what they looked for as well. It's those intermunicipal, interjurisdictional partnerships, I think are there's potential there. They're complicated, but we can't just work with them on our own, I guess. And there is some effort to that regard with the recent regional transit study that Cranbrook spearheaded and was just at the regional district board meeting here last week. So hopefully there's some elements coming there. It's not really touching on the commuter service aspect of it, but maybe that's a good start for some of those discussions and improved cooperation.
Go ahead, Councillor McGuire.
Yeah, further to that, I'm not being critical of BC Transit specifically. I'm just more curious, what can we do as a municipality to increase our services? And on this expansion specifically, are we only expanding the 24 route? And how much expansion are we talking for that Peaks to Plattsville route? Or is this just really a backup?
It's like I said, it's one additional vehicle being added to our fleet, which is helpful to all four of the services, just for some, I think the word they use is redundancy in the fleet. So if there's problems or something with one of the buses, then we have that replacement more readily available, and just helps with efficiency of maintenance schedules and all that. The hours of service being added there is about 555 hours of service. So we do have some flexibility in terms of how that's divided between the Route 23 winter shuttle and the Route 24 local service. But that'll be what we're working with BC Transit here in the coming months.
Councillor Dunnebeck, go ahead.
Are we limited to working with just BC Transit, or is there a possibility of having maybe some private companies be solicited to provide this service and give entrepreneurs a chance to maybe help develop a different offering of transit rather than have large buses, which are hard to maintain and require a lot of work? Smaller buses and giving other people the opportunity rather than just BC Transit, I think, is maybe something that we should look at in the long run.
So that's a great thought. One of the reasons why we don't have Greyhound service anymore is because of the capacity and the cost on a per rider basis. Troy, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we are paying, BC Transit's paying 44% of the cost, or is that the other way around? We pay 44.
It's about our share. Yeah.
Our share is 44, so they're picking up almost 60% of the cost of the transit service. Go ahead.
The one business that comes to mind that's sort of picking up a lot of slack in the West Kootenays is Mountain Mike's. And he's been, from what I understand, I haven't done a lot of homework about it, but he has been actually quite successful in developing routes at helping rural community get to where they need to be, not only for medical, but kids going to camp, people that can't afford to get to Vancouver. Now they can. Again, just my two
No,
bits.
fair enough. I think we're stuck with BC Transit for the time being, but hopefully other options surface over time for sure. Okay, I'm going to call a question on that. All those in favor of receipt of the report? Any opposed? The motion is carried. Next up, we have the motion on the transit annual operating agreement that the CAO and the manager of planning be authorized to execute the operating agreement for 2024-2025. Councillor Roberts moves and Councillor Karen seconds. Any discussion on this? Anything to add, Troy?
No, I think this is fairly routine. Happens every year where we have to approve the annual operating agreement, which sets out, kind of acknowledges the anticipated budget based on BC Transit's fiscal year. We of course have to translate that to our annual calendar year-based budgeting. But the AOA is from what council's proving today is consistent with our budgeted figures there, which is revenue. We're anticipating about $142,000 in revenue and expenses of approximately $350,000. So, and like you said, that's about 44% of the overall operating cost of our share of the transit. Yeah, I'll leave it at that in case there's any questions.
Council? Hearing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion is carried. Next up, we have the Kimberley Bike Park Revitalization Project, and we have a motion on the floor that council receive the Manager of Parks and Facilities staff report dated May the 13th, and further that staff be directed to bring forward an amendment to the year 1, 2024-2028 5-year financial plan bylaw for council's consideration at a future meeting to increase the capital expenditure by $26,423 to account for higher than anticipated cost of phase 1. And finally, that council authorized the CAO to sign the Columbia Basin Trust modification agreement related to phase 1 of the bike park project. Mover, please. Councillor Cairns moves and Councillor Roberts seconds. You want to speak to this, Nicole?
Thank you, Mayor and Council, for me this evening. This is just to provide an update related to the Kimberley Bike Park and the project working with the Kimberley Trail Society on since November 2022. Ultimately, we went out to tender back in December for the bike park revitalization. We received a number of quotations back, and we selected Val Solutions, industry leader in bike parks, to work with us on the project. After sitting down and evaluating their proposal, identified that there was a shortage in original dollars. So we approached CBT to vote for that shortfall in funding, which what you see in the modification agreement. And the second, to provide an update related to the pump track. KTS was fortunate to receive BC tourism grant for that project, which will see $367,000 change go towards the paved pump track portion of the overall project. And we're hoping to start this project in July, with completion for in and around August or September for the community's use of the fall.
That would be awesome. Been kind of waiting to see the shovels in the ground on that one. It's really visible, and I think is going to be of high interest to the community once it gets started. Councillor Dunneback.
I want nothing to do but to expedite this, to give back what the kids have been missing out on. It's absolutely amazing going down Rotary every day and seeing how much use the skate park gets, and even the dirt jumps the way they are. is awesome. The one thing I guess I'm a little bit concerned about is that we have the same sort of situation as we did with the park that was built up on Swan there. And I'd like to see that we have some sort of holdback and some sort of power that they can't just sort of dry up and disappear, and that it gets done in a timely manner, and the quality of work is top notch.
Thank you, Councillor Dunneback. Further, Councillor?
Certainly. Thank you, Councillor Dunneback. Each of that's outlined with the small service agreement that we've identified with them, and it holds less the BC Built Clean Act. So all very closely with group. Yep.
Call the question. All those in favor? That motion is carried. Thanks for that, Nicole. Okay, next up we have the check run, and the check run is in the amount of $551,668 to be approved as paid. Mover, please. Councillor McBain, thank you. Councillor Karen seconds. Discussion. Councillor Roberts, go ahead.
Mr. Mayor, it's a fairly standard month really, but the one that always jumps out at me is the I think it's $665,000 that we pay in insurances for our properties that we have. I suppose some people would call that a bargain. Just strikes me as a fair amount. And also there's a fair chunk of payments going out this month for the standing grants for specific places like the Trail Society, the Public Library, the museum, the Chamber of Commerce, and the Arts Council.
So the community grants have been
Yep.
issued.
Yep.
Yeah, cool. Thank you for that, Councillor Roberts. Council, further questions? Hearing none. All those in favor? Any opposed? That motion is carried. All right, excellent. We have 3 or 4 items in camera tonight. We're getting a little bit long on the clock, so I think we will skip straight through to close this evening. Could I have a mover to move into close, please? Councillor Dunneback, thank you. Councillor McGuire seconds. All those in favor? Any opposed? Motion is carried. Awesome. 2 minutes to clear the courtroom. Great opportunity to talk to you. How about tomorrow, Dave? Will probably be another hour. I'm happy to talk to you after that. Telephone? Okay.